It was October the 11th, 2025 when the news broke. Diane Keaton was gone. At 79, the woman who had redefined what it meant to be both vulnerable and fearless left behind a silence that stretched far beyond Hollywood. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, and generations who grew up watching her make awkwardness look beautiful and intelligence feel magnetic. But one voice stayed quiet. Her daughter, Dexter Keaton, the child Diane had adopted and raised on her own, said nothing at first. For weeks, fans waited. Then quietly she spoke, not in an interview or press statement, but in a simple message shared online. She called her mother an amazing woman, one whose love was constant, whose humor never faded, and whose strength shaped everything she became. It was brief, heartfelt, and deeply personal. That message revealed more than any headline could. It wasn't about fame or legacy, but about the kind of mother Diane Keaton truly was: present, protective, and endlessly curious about life. And in the echo of her daughter's words, the world began to see not just the actress who won an Oscar, but the woman who built her life on her own terms. Diane Hall was born on January 5, 1946, in Los Angeles, California. She grew up in a middle-class family, the daughter of Jack Hall, a real estate broker, and Dorothy, a homemaker and amateur photographer. From the beginning, she was restless, a dreamer who collected moments instead of possessions. At Fairfax High School, she joined the drama club, where her voice and her awkward confidence made her unforgettable. When she moved to New York in the mid-60s, she traded her family name Hall for her mother's maiden name, Keaton. It wasn't just a stage name, it was a declaration of independence. At the neighborhood playhouse, she studied acting under Sanford Meisner, absorbing a philosophy that would guide her entire career: truth before perfection. She wanted to be real, even if it wasn't pretty. Her first break came on Broadway in Hair, where her refusal to perform nude set her apart. In an era when rebellion was expected, Diane's rebellion was restraint. That quiet defiance caught the attention of a young filmmaker named Woody Allen, who cast her in Play It Again, Sam. Their collaboration changed both their lives. Through the 70s, Keaton's characters, sharp, eccentric, unpredictable, felt alive in a way few women on screen did. When Annie Hall arrived in 1977, audiences saw something entirely new: a heroine who was unsure, messy, and utterly magnetic. Her mismatched vests, ties, and hats became a symbol of individuality. But what truly resonated was the vulnerability beneath her humor. She didn't try to be glamorous, she tried to be honest. That honesty, however, came with a price. Hollywood loved her for what she represented, but never quite knew where to place her. She wasn't a conventional beauty, nor did she want to be. In interviews, she would later say that she never set out to be anyone's idea of perfect. She just wanted to live truthfully, and that, she said, was enough. For Diane Keaton, the road to success was never about fitting in. It was about standing still long enough to be seen. And from that stillness came the quiet power that would define her entire life. By the late 1970s, Diane Keaton had become one of Hollywood's most compelling figures. Her performance in Annie Hall earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress and permanently reshaped how audiences saw female leads. She wasn't the perfect woman written into scripts of the time. She was flawed, human, and disarmingly real. That vulnerability, wrapped in wit and eccentricity, made her unforgettable. After Annie Hall, Keaton's career surged. She appeared in The Godfather Part 2 and Reds, earning more acclaim for roles that demanded emotional precision and quiet strength. Yet behind the growing fame, she remained wary of Hollywood's expectations. While other stars chased publicity, she kept her distance, rarely discussing her personal life. Her romantic relationships with Woody Allen, Warren Beatty, and later Al Pacino became tabloid fascination. But she refused to let the press define her story. She once said she was drawn to brilliant men but married to freedom. That freedom became her trademark. She avoided the trappings of celebrity life, never married, and resisted cosmetic procedures that were becoming standard in Hollywood. In her 40s and 50s, when most actresses were being told their careers were over, Diane continued to lead films like Baby Boom, Father of the Bride, and Something's Gotta Give. Her roles reflected her reality: strong, independent women navigating love and aging with humor and grace. Still, solitude lingered at the edge of her success. Friends described her as warm but elusive, present yet always observing from a slight distance. She collected houses, photos, and hats, objects that gave order to a world she found unpredictable. Her journals, later published, revealed both gratitude and fear: gratitude for her success, fear that she might grow old without the family she had always imagined. It was during this time, as she moved through her 50s, that Diane began to reconsider what fulfillment really meant. The applause, the awards, the iconic status, all of it was meaningful, but incomplete. She had built a life on independence, yet something inside her longed for connection, for permanence, for the kind of love that wasn't bound by scripts or expectations. That longing would soon shape the most personal decision of her life: the choice to become a mother, entirely on her own terms. By the time Diane Keaton reached her early 50s, she had already achieved nearly everything a performer could dream of. She had Oscars, timeless films, and a legacy that stretched across generations. Yet in the quiet of her own home, there was an absence she could no longer ignore. She had spent decades playing mothers, wives, and caretakers on screen, but had never lived those roles beyond the cameras. So when the world least expected it, she made a decision that changed her life. She adopted. Her first child, Dexter, came into her life in 1996. Diane was 50. A few years later, she adopted a son, Duke. It was a deeply personal choice. No publicity, no announcement, no red carpet. For Diane, motherhood wasn't about filling a void. It was about creating a family rooted in unconditional love. Those close to her said she approached it with the same intensity she brought to her work: committed, protective, and endlessly curious. Dexter Keaton would later describe her mother as an amazing woman, someone who did everything with purpose. To the world, Diane was the eccentric actress who wore gloves and hats to interviews. To Dexter, she was simply Mom, the woman who stayed up late helping with homework, who cooked, who listened, who turned ordinary days into adventures. Motherhood softened her. In interviews, Diane spoke of her children with awe, saying they gave her a reason to stop worrying about herself. She no longer needed validation from Hollywood. Her happiness was measured in laughter around the dinner table, in quiet car rides, in the tiny moments that fame had never offered. Even as her career continued, she never allowed work to overshadow family. She took fewer roles, spent more time at home, and filled her journals with reflections about parenting and gratitude. For Diane Keaton, love was no longer something that existed in scripts or fleeting relationships. It was real, grounded, and living inside her home. In choosing motherhood later in life, Diane Keaton rewrote her own story. She didn't follow a timeline. She followed her heart, and through Dexter and Duke, she discovered the truest role she would ever play: not an actress, not a muse, but a mother. As the years passed, Diane Keaton began to step away from the constant motion of Hollywood. Her work slowed, but her presence never faded. She became more selective, choosing roles that reflected who she truly was: women with depth, humor, and a quiet resilience. Films like The Family Stone, Morning Glory, and Book Club weren't just performances. They were reflections of a woman comfortable with time, change, and imperfection. Away from the screen, she turned her attention to the things that had always grounded her. She wrote essays and memoirs that read less like celebrity confessions and more like letters from a thoughtful observer. She poured herself into photography and design, restoring old homes across Los Angeles. Each project was meticulous and deeply personal, a way to preserve beauty in a world that moved too fast. But perhaps what defined her later years most was her devotion to causes close to her heart. She supported animal welfare, historic preservation, and environmental awareness. Her love for animals was especially well known. Her house filled with rescue dogs often felt more like a sanctuary than a celebrity home. When she passed in October 2025, her daughter Dexter chose to honor her not with words about fame or film, but through action. She urged fans to donate to an animal rescue organization in Diane's name, a tribute that captured her mother's compassion far better than any speech. Friends say Diane had grown more reflective in her final years. She spoke often about gratitude, about finding peace in imperfection. She loved spending time with her children, taking long walks, collecting memories instead of awards. The woman once seen as Hollywood's most eccentric spirit had at last found stillness. Her quiet years weren't an ending. They were a return to simplicity, to purpose, to the kind of life she had always wanted, one guided by honesty, creativity, and love. When Diane Keaton passed, the tributes were immediate and immense. From fellow actors to lifelong fans, the same word appeared again and again: authentic. For more than 5 decades, she had built a career and a life around being unmistakably herself. In an industry that thrived on illusion, she had the courage to remain real. Her legacy wasn't defined by the films alone, though they remain iconic. Annie Hall redefined the romantic comedy. The Godfather gave her quiet power within a story ruled by men. Reds proved her dramatic depth, but what lingered beyond the performances was the feeling she left with audiences, that it was possible to be both strong and uncertain, to embrace imperfection without apology. Those who worked with her described her as instinctive and fearless. Al Pacino once said she had a lightness that made everything feel alive. Meryl Streep called her a spirit who refused to be copied. To younger actresses, she became a blueprint, a reminder that individuality could be a form of resistance. Yet perhaps her most enduring influence lives in her family. Dexter's tribute, calling her mother amazing and encouraging kindness toward animals, summed up everything Diane had stood for. She had taught her daughter that strength didn't come from control or perfection, but from compassion, humor, and honesty. Even after her death, her words continue to circulate online. Short reflections she'd shared in interviews or books. "You can't be loved by everyone," she once said, "but you can be loved for who you are." It was a philosophy that guided every choice she made, from the way she dressed to the way she parented. Diane Keaton's story is not one of constant spotlight, but of quiet revolution. She changed what women could be on screen, and what they were allowed to be off it. Her laughter, her curiosity, her refusal to fit anyone's expectations, all of it shaped a legacy that feels timeless. And in the end, it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the authenticity. The same truth her daughter carries now, the belief that a full life isn't measured in fame, but in the love you leave behind. In the days after Diane Keaton's passing, her daughter's message lingered quietly online. No interviews, no cameras, no long speeches, just a few sentences filled with gratitude and love. For those who followed Diane's life, it felt fitting. She had never needed a stage to be remembered. Her truth had always lived in smaller moments, the kind that never made headlines. Dexter's tribute, calling her mother an amazing woman, wasn't a farewell. It was a continuation of everything Diane believed in: honesty, kindness, and the courage to live without disguise. It reminded the world that behind the hats, the laughter, and the awards stood a woman who valued authenticity above all else. In every sense, Diane Keaton's greatest performance was her life. She showed that vulnerability could be power, that aging could be beautiful, and that independence could coexist with love. And now, through her daughter's voice, that message endures. Because Diane Keaton didn't leave behind just films or fame. She left behind a lesson that to be remembered, one doesn't need to be perfect, one only needs to be real. For more emotional stories, check out this video.